Welcome to Portals of Perception and to Evolving Together number 5. Today we are looking to build on our earlier conversations and reflect on the process of mutual and collective liberation. I'm here with two friends, Nigel and Well, each with their own unique PhD journey. That is the personal human development journey. Nigel, Well, welcome.
Thank you, Aviv.
Thank you, Aviv.
Great to be here.
Well, the three of us spent 4 days together a week ago and a few days, together with a larger global community, about 150 of us. And some of the areas we explored really are in the sweet spot of what we are journeying to inquire into here in Evolving Together. And so I think it's going to be productive for me to try to put a little bit of a context of what we've journeyed into, then frame the live contemplation that I bring specifically into today, and then invite you to speak to some of what's alive in you in context of what I'm going to be describing or really anything else in the context of evolving together. And we play with that, and then I'd like us to try to thread a bit of the work we've actually generated in the journey together with the global community and reflect on it live today, see where we are with that. How about that as a starter launching pad for today?
Yeah,
Right.
super.
Yeah.
Well, so the high level context is, obviously it's a global community been on a journey for a while where the shared inquiry is what is going on in the world, what is this liminal zone we are in, side of humanity at large, moving from one time into a new time, from one epoch to another epoch. What is the nature of this transition, and how are we called into participative engagement in this process? That's kind of the bigger frame. And we started on day one with asking, why deepen? Why do we human beings need to seek to find deeper conversations, deeper ways of reflection? And brought into it multiple awarenesses, including becoming antibody for a superficial world, but more importantly, building a foundation that can withstand the robust and high velocity change, and variety of other appreciations of what does it mean to access greater depth, and also how do we do that? And again, the fascination of doing something like this, inquiring into a space like this with a group of people where each person is in their own journey. Nobody is assuming that they have the truth. It's a shared discovery, it's a shared inquiry, is that we get multiple perspectives. And so we build the why deepen, what is it we want to deepen in, and how do we actually engage in a deepening inquiry. And then we explored from that the inquiry into the crisis of belief that people experience through times of change, and highlighted the 3 fault lines or the nature of resistance that we encounter as we go through a development journey. And it was that we used then as a foundation to inquire about what does it mean to spiritualize the world, spiritualize ourselves, and specifically spiritualize knowledge, and the difference between the first dimension of knowledge to second and third dimension of knowledge, whereby there is a way in which we reverse the process, almost in the sense of we were born into the first nature of who we are. We get to experience life in a standard human model, And we then discover that we are growing to unleash the consciousness of what it is we choose to focus on, and that within that there is a permission that we can enter, whereby we can actually reverse the process out of which life emanates in the first place, in which there is an unleash and an unlock that amounts to spiritualizing the world, spiritualizing ourselves, spiritualizing the space between us, spiritualizing knowledge. So that was day one. That last bit is actually a profound space to enter on another call when we choose to go deeper into it. But we used that because we wanted to frame that as a foundation for day two. And day two, we journeyed into a space we visited before, and we looked to describe the journey of the soul in the experience of human life, and how a soul shows up in a person with a dual brief to first keep the person alive, and secondly to help the person realize the highest purpose, by which we mean manifest the unique configuration of qualities that person represents. Premise being we are each here in a unique configuration, inside of which there is a dual awareness, which is first we each come to learn the lessons that we came to acquire in this experience, and secondly, and not less important, perhaps as important or more, we are each to bring unique configuration of perspectives and appreciations to life. It's almost as though like there's never been a fingerprint like yours and mine. In a similar way, there is something that the world, the universe gets to experience through your eyes, through your senses, through your appreciation, through your capacity to spiritualize life, that's unique, that's never been here before, at which point you are not just a portal of perception for the universe, you are, well, as you suggested at some point, portal of connection and possibility for life itself. And so we went through that, but we describe how the experience of life is one where we get separated from that. And in the separation, there is the first sense of trauma or anguish or pain of having been separated from that capacity. And then secondarily, there is the anguish of being distanced from our natural birthright and natural capacity to express the qualities that we were actually meant to express, whether it's strength or flow or beauty or honor or integrity or intimacy or love, whatever the quality is. And then we describe that because of that, there is what sometimes is called shadow, and we've done previously work on shadow, and we reframed actually the idea of shadow inside what we describe as a broader perspective, which we call the ghost. The ghost in that was described as the psychology of the soul that initiates a compensatory act in the absence of being able to express its highest nature, and how that forces the soul in its fixation and fascination with wanting to not be lesser in stature to its natural inclination, how it reproduces a compensatory act that sometimes is a cover job or a camouflage for actually having been separated. So if you are meant to express strength, you're actually experiencing the distance from strength, and you will look to act strong, but actually it's not inside out. It's actually covering for something else on the inside. We then described how there is a process by which we can develop a soul inquiry to get interested in the compensatory act, because it contains information about our higher nature. And there is a way in which we can, so again, sometimes called shadow work, we invited to engage in this soul inquiry as a way of releasing and melting the compensatory anguish, and whereby rather than suppressing the experience, there is an information and a discovery process. So we did all that, and that led us to a process that we described as the inner conclave, which was the recognition that we have multiple lives within, and we can voice the anguish, we can voice the pain, and we can actually create a consultancy process inside our interior space. One where we're not hiding, not suppressing, not eliminating, but actually potentially befriending or reparenting or remothering or refriending in whatever way and capacity we need to bring to engage with whatever it was that surfaced, that where we unlock internal resources to address whatever struggle, whatever got frozen in time in us. And we went through this journey to get to day 3, which is the zone and the space we've been, actually the 3 of us, been in exploration already earlier, which was, so how do we bring this individual journey in which there is an important individuated dimension into the mutualized space, the collective space, whereby there is a premise that actually what we just described in the individual case, there is a premise in which we help heal each other, in which we help liberate each other, in which there is this sense of I'm not actually doing the healing on you, and you're not actually doing the healing on me. It's as though we are creating a space where there is a heal thyself process, where it's similar to, you no longer need to find the guru outside of you, because you can actually become your own teacher inside the journey together with others, and you become your own healer. This is not saying or suggesting there aren't profound ways we can help each other, uplift each other, fortify each other, reveal to each other more about our true and higher nature. All of the above is true. The nuanced awareness here is the invitation is to ripen into the maturation in which we are each alone decisive, in the sense that we take responsibility for our journey, for our discovery, for our regulation, and so on and so forth. So on that day 3, we actually engaged in a fascinating inquiry, which is part of what I'm hoping to bring a little later in the conversation of, so where will we explore the collective inquiry, and what might be a way to approach this, and what are some of the preventions that we sometimes call stop situations, and also what are some of the higher possibilities, which is the inquiry the 3 of us actually already been in the first 4 episodes, that in some way open the pathway to experiment it in the way we experimented with it with a larger group. So that was day 3. Day 4, we brought 2 more pieces. One was to do with the teacher's journey and the double guru-student trap that essentially told a story of what is the golden shadow and why the 2 sides get locked, the student and the teacher, and in an even bigger context, why do we premise the idea that we have entered a space where you are to be your own self-authored, self-arising, self-starter, self-regulating, self-fashioning person. And why it is so critical that we actually assume this fuller responsibility as part of the universalis invitation to become adult in the universe. So that was one part on day 4, and all of that journey was to actually enable us in the latter part of day 4 be reflective on what's happening in the world. Why does it feel that the world is semi-falling apart, slowly or quickly? And what is the modern operating system that, in the context of the epochal trace, the 7-fold epochal trace, we call the blue operating system, and how it was designed and developed, and why it is falling apart now. By the way, all the high-level pieces I mentioned are recorded on other segments, on portals, so all can be traced, some in conversations with Jeff Vanderkloot, some in conversation with Karen and Kira Key in the Universalis series. But I wanted to put the bigger picture in front of us and offer that the thread that I bring to our conversation today, that I stayed with from our earlier explorations and from that day 3, is what I will describe perhaps, and I'm very curious whether you'd want to take that and respond to that or anything else of what I shared, but what I will describe as the 3 or 4 dimensions of the together part when we talk about evolving together. So in the simplest way, I'll describe it this way. When 2 people are in conversations and they actually make the space to see each other, okay, to recognize each other, to acknowledge each other, there is a way in which there is a beginning of a togetherness that was not there before. So that's dimension 1. And then there is what we can describe as dimension 2, which we are in a conversation here, the 3 of us, and at some point we feel that it's not just the 3 of us, there is recognizing what each person brings, that you are a unique configuration of insights and know-how and experience and qualities. So there is that recognition, and then there is a recognition that there is some kind of a field or space we create together and that we inhabit that has a life of its own. So that's dimension 2. And then there is a dimension 3, which is sometimes the individuated, the recognition of the individuated configuration that each person is, and then the recognition and the attunement to the space that we create, or the field that we create. There is a 3rd dimension, which is that there is a current that can come through it, a certain dynamic, emergent process that will sometimes have its own intelligence and its own nature. And sometimes we will experience that we together bring to life the quality, the nature of dignity and honor. Another time there will be a sense that we are together inhabiting a fortifying space. There is the quality of fortifying each other. And a 3rd time there will just be humor, endless humor, as well as there may be some time that we inhabit a space of pain and struggle. So the recognition that there is a current as the 3rd space, and that sometimes there is even a 4th dimension riding on top of that, which is that we together can metabolize what you would perhaps describe as an archetypal nature or generational quality or nature or ancestral quality. So we can actually choose, the 3 of us, to metabolize sometimes the struggle of a nation or of a tribe or of a people or something in ancient time or in current time, and how we can allow the mutualized space to become a service industry for a cause that we appreciate. So I describe that as the 4th, sometimes even 5th dimension. So that's the thread I held, which we didn't really get to open up on day 3, but I felt that the journeying we have made, the 3 of us, in evolving together is making a propositional invitation to this idea that while we are discovering together what evolving together is, the premise being, hey, I'm limited on, got tremendous capacities, each one of us are on our own, but it's always limited. There is more that we can get to together. And then there are those other dimensions that we can liberate with each other, for each other, and beyond us in our togetherness. Again, this is kind of a little longer than I anticipated, but at least it provides a fuller context. Where would you want to go live with whatever is priming you within this context, please.
Okay. What was catching me, Aviv, when you were speaking towards the end of what you were saying, was that there is a possibility in a dialogue of this nature that something new can emerge that may never have been considered or conceived before. So it can invite new perception, it can invite new consciousness, it can invite new opportunity for the moving on of things. And that for me is always a fascinating dimension, because we're then in a space that none of us could have accessed on our own, and where something that would, say, want to help the human state of affairs is able to come into play. So it gives us a leverage to literally begin, you could say, in a small way, the process of actually evolving by bringing new consciousness, new opportunity to play. Right? So that's an exciting prospect when it's possible to touch.
Yeah, you're almost suggesting, well, that the premise for coming together is to facilitate that very midwifery birthing process. That yes, when we're reflective of the ancient world or prehistoric world, you'd say people were together also in the first place because there was better chances of survival.
Yep.
Presumably, if survival issues are addressed, and there are many places around the world where there are survival issues, let's just face it, right? But for a minute, in an imaginary world or a future world where those are addressed, you're saying the premise is no longer survival. The premise is, how do we come together in such a way where we constitute a womb of new possibilities for life itself?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I'd start from the same place. And in me, it's characterized by the difference between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction.
Say that one more time so we get that clear. What's the distinction between what to what?
Between asexual reproduction, which all of my constituent parts, the cells, reproduce by asexual reproduction or division. But the human reproduces by sexual reproduction, which takes two completely different aspects, the sperm and the egg, puts them together. Now, the nature of asexual reproduction is it's a division. So it's constrained by its history to only repeat what history can do. The beauty of sexual reproduction is it puts two things together, and it seems like there's a shuffling, but it feels like in that mutuality, something higher can invest into the uniqueness of what is produced, so that every child is not just a reproduction of its mother or its father, but it's a brand new possibility. And it feels like every time that duality is brought together safely, even in a conversation, that is possible, that investment from higher can endorse that process. So we're on the edge of newness all the time if we're prepared to bring together opposites, duality. And that's the human proposition of ever creating new.
So are you suggesting or hinting that there is a third, there is a cellular asexual reproduction, there is sexual reproduction that give birth to a new life, And are you hinting that there is a third process whereby human beings can be in a dialogical inquiry, in some kind of an exploration, in some kind of a communion, where it doesn't actually have to involve that bodily, very important process without which the species has no continuance, but you're talking about another process. Can you try and describe the journey from that second to the third dimension, please?
I have one clue into it.
Okay.
Probably only one at the moment, which is seeing the first life that we have on the planet, which is like the child life up to puberty. And it has the nature of take. What can I get? Because it's dependent on everything else. So it's totally natural that it's based in what can I get? But then after puberty, there's the sense of being able to create a new life in oneself by the interactions or the sharings that we have with each other. And one word for the sharing is give and take. So there's a whole moving diagram of give and take in the sharing. And the clue that's presented itself to me is that possible other life is where all are based in give, or in being in service to something else.
I'm listening to the language we're using, and it strikes me this is where sometime, if we follow the suggestion from Well that we are looking to make ourselves available for new awareness, new consciousness, new combination to sometime be birthed through us, then sometime we will need to come up with new language. So the word sharing actually has a dividing, because you divide to shares. So I don't know that we should use the word sharing. Perhaps the word we need to use for the higher case is togethering, or something that has the intimation of combining or communing or mutualizing. This is where the language, we're looking for a word in the dictionary that will describe the essence of co-creation, right? Whereby we are engaged in a unified, or even not yet unified, but in a mutualized inquiry, whereby there is a co-creation that's made possible because we are together, because the togetherness constitute, as we've explored in previous conversations, you bring the parts of your experience that I don't have, and so on and so forth. And then there is how your presence liberates in me and my presence liberates in you what perhaps you didn't even know was latent in you. So there is that aspect of the co-creation and the important awareness that you are both offering. Then there is something else that can come through it, an extra something else that was not with any of the individual parts. Just because, if we can even poetically describe this, because the universe quivers in the presence of a combination that was never quite available for it before, and it says, well, here is a little extra for this marriage of possibilities.
Yeah.
Yes. I have some alternative words which may offer an extra clue, and it's something I'm pursuing at the moment, is the first life is the nature of extract. And the second life is exchange. And in pondering the third life, the word that's presented itself to me so far is exponent, which speaks about an exponential process, or almost the nature of a nuclear or catalytic process. But I'm still searching for that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's
It's curious that they all begin with EX, so they're all to do with sex.
Indeed.
Yeah. There's a funny little word that came together some years ago when we were talking about these subjects. Because if you consider that we each have what I would term a universal life in the uniqueness of ourselves, then when you get together, there's a possibility of having a communiverse, where the different universes start to come together, you know, and something builds that is communal between you, that invokes something new. Yeah.
Communiverse. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so part of the exploration is indeed for new language. Nigel, anything else you'd want to say about the sense of duality and that you shared? I'm now sensitized to the word shared. That you offered in contemplation towards today.
When you were talking about spiritualizing, and you mentioned the soul journey, one thing that got prompted in me was how when two things are brought together, they produce interference patterns. And also a hologram is a photograph that's produced by bringing two beams of light together. And the interesting thing about the hologram is it reveals the depth, or the third vector that the two could never see on their own. It's like our eyes, they each see a flat picture. But in the whatever goes on in the brain of putting the two together, the third aspect of depth is revealed. So it feels significant that, again, bringing two together allows penetration beyond what those two separately reveal.
What else, Well, would you want to offer from what's alive in you, and also in the note you shared where you talked about how we are all participants in the futuring of life, and how that comes into the starter that we are developing here?
Right.
Well, I think this has a great deal to do with what you were talking about in terms of spiritualizing. Because potentially there's almost like a switching on of the light of something, which enables things to be seen and experienced and come to, but simply weren't accessible before. And my sense is that is one of the functions of human beings or human life, to actually light up the tapestry of what has already been caused, to allow new to be perceived, new to be witnessed, new to be brought into play, so that, in a sense, the universe becomes more than it was without our intervention.
Yes, there is a poetic imagery there, in that scientists tell us that I forget now, whatever 83% or whatever it is of the universe is dark energy. Actually, part is dark energy and part is dark matter. And nobody can really fully exactly explain what that is, other than the mathematical equations describe that there is a condition like this. So you are poetically saying the universe itself is in a continual evolving process of birthing itself. And part of the way to consider is that the first infrastructure of the universe is in place, and it continually is seeking its own spiritualization, which you are suggesting we can contemplate in the idea of switching on the light. So the part that's dark increasingly can be enlightened. In other words, to enlighten the universe about its own spiritual possibility. And the implicit proposal is, could could that be part of what human beings are for? Could it be that human life is the agency, the industrial agency of that lighting up process, that spiritualization process? In which case, there is a pretty straightforward job description for what we're describing as a universalis human. Hey, what are you here to do, universalis human? Guess what? Turn on the light. Spiritualize the universe.
Yeah. Well, you can see this in a very real way with people, because when we get going into something that is actually evocative in this way, you can actually see the light come on in people's eyes. You can see it coming alive, literally. So it's a very tangible thing. It's not an intellectual concept. It's an actualizing, happening thing that goes on.
You're saying you can see it in people's eyes, and you can also experience it in this human system, physically, energetically, psychospiritually, even the brightness and the elasticity of the skin, and in so many other ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, people, for example, get moved. Yeah. You're talking about the depth of things. The depth of things moves people. And the newly emerging possibilities are exciting. Yeah, and these are different kinds of light that come into play.
Please, Nigel.
Yeah, can I present another natural analogy for me? And it's to do with colour. I may have mentioned this before, but when one mixes colour with paint, it's a subtractive process. So you don't have to mix many colours before it gets darker and darker into black. But then, if you do the same with coloured lights, which is more like active colour, it goes the other way, and the combination gets brighter and brighter, tending to white. And the sense is that it's an integrating process rather than a subtractive one. And I can't prove it yet, but I get the sense that breathing and the air works the same way. Because science tells us that breathing is an extractive process to do with oxygen. Well, that may be true. But I believe it's a chamber where what one breathes in the air can meet one's own occult. And that works in a radically different way. It's an integrating, compounding process. Hence the word inspiration, which on the one hand means breathing in air, but also it means changing one's level upward. So I just have this theory that it works way beyond what we've been told.
So you were tracing the difference in octave in the mixing of chemical, physical colors and light colors, and equating this with the understanding that when we breathe at two dimensions. We breathe in the air, and also we breathe in the energetic content that's in the air. What is exciting for me in the awareness that you are bringing to us is that you are describing in both of those a sense of reversal from one octave to the next. And this is something I've been tracking in other spaces, how we know that the right side of the brain is directly connected to the left side of the body. So there is a reversal or a kind of a changeover that occurs. And we see time and again that as you go through an octave shift, you're going through a process of reversal. And what we described right at the beginning, the sense of the first nature of knowledge, is one where you condense that knowledge into, I've learned this by heart, I can now describe that, I know this. we describe that as one dimension of knowledge, and there is a way in which we have the capacity to travel back to the source of knowledge, in which we're going through a reversal process, sourcing the deeper emanatory dimension of knowledge. So when Francis Bacon, I think, said knowledge is power, he meant it perhaps in one way, and it was taken largely to then, throughout the history of philosophy, if you know something that I don't know, you have knowledge over me, you have leverage over me. But then if I know some things about myself that I didn't know before, that self-knowledge makes me powerful in relation to myself. Now we are describing a third appreciation of knowledge is power, which is there is a way in which you can travel back the threads of knowledge about the world and the universe, and when you are able to travel up those threads of knowledge, which we describe as spiritualizing knowledge, you unlock power that you never imagined was possible before.
Yes.
We just spiritualized Francis Bacon, whether he chooses to agree with us or not, I don't know. But I think the quote is appropriated, associated with him in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something else in that as well. Sorry. But for example, if you think of power as it's often thought of as something that people are trying to acquire, and turn that round to the next octave, then what you're really trying to do in that is empower. You're trying to empower things to be what they can be. And in doing that, you liberate a much greater possibility, where you're not seeking power, you're actually empowering things to grow, to become better, to move on. And that's a service function. It's a different attitude, a different way of going on, in which you're not, for example, trying to be better than other people. You're trying to help other people to be better so that you can be better too, in the process of us all getting better together, you know?
Yes.
Different attitude.
Well, you're going to bring something, Nigel, because I sense actually this is, please.
Well, it reminded me that earlier on, when you were talking of spiritualize, you also mentioned the soul. And in the world, the soul is seen as a fixed thing. I mean, they don't know what it is, but they fix it to the bottom line is something programmed to keep you alive. But I feel like the soul is a whole journey of octave changes. And as you say, there's a reversal at each level. Because if the bottom line of it is the survival mode, but if we take that survival mode up into higher octaves, that's a disaster, really. And we need to find new levels of soul that are way beyond the bottom line of the survival motive. And I believe that ladder of soul development is what can get us to the spirit.
All right. Well, right there is a premise for a whole other conversation of evolving together with our souls. I sense that just in the things we were now speaking about, there is an entry to share and rethread through some of the journey that I alluded to before. Because one of the dimensions of this exploration that we touched earlier in previous conversations, and also was part of that 4-day exploration with the global community, was there is value in being prepared to look at the pain point, at the struggling point, and name some of what sometimes I describe as below the line preventions and stop situations. And so here is what some of the slides I harvested, and I call this evolving together, number 5, preventions below the line and possibilities above the line. And what actually occurred was that I asked, what are the inquiry spaces for collective human dynamics where we can explore the idea of preventions and possibilities? And I proposed a whole range. So I proposed that I'll swiftly bring them, describe in a word or two the upside and the downside, and why we focused on what we focused, and then give you a chance to comment to this. The value in this exercise is we want to approach and carry forward in evolving together an integral way of looking at the world, such that all human dynamics, all organizational dynamics and systems can have a part to play in this. So naturally, the first space I said families. Families is a very compound space to inquire. There are tremendous amount of work done in the world in various bodies of work. The upside of exploring there is we each have an experience with a family of origin and then family of choice. The downside is that there are very unique patterns, both arresting, preventing patterns and possibility-making patterns, and it needs a whole research by itself. But to approach this idea without first mentioning families would be missing. So then I said, well, there are tribal societies. That's a way for us to engage in the anthropological research. The upside of this research is, guess what? In some of the ancient tribal societies and some tribal societies that even survived into the modern age, there is know-how and intelligence that the world actually badly needs. The downside in that research is that we would largely be exploring it through anthropological means because we are not necessarily operating currently in that setting, and we want to be integrating ourselves such that we can be dialectic in the interior as we explore the outer. So then I looked at the third option. I said, well, the two of you are living in the UK. We've always had fascination from the beginning of time with royalty, with nobility, with the aristocracy. There is just quite a bit of material about this, certainly in the popular culture, in the Hollywood and the adjacent and parallel productions in the UK. And there is a unique poetic potency to this. But again, I thought that we will be looking at it from the outside. It has a unique typology and it's fascinating. But one day we can pick the research there. I said, let's not start there. Then I said, well, I was born and raised in a kibbutz. I'm fascinated by this experiment, probably the most creative and fascinating social experiment of the 20th century. At a unique point of time in the establishment of Israel, answered a unique national need, and at some point 3% of the population was responsible for, in the kibbutz movement, was responsible for 18% or more, 23% I think, of the GDP of the country. It's just unheard of. So you're talking about something that was extraordinarily successful. What enabled its success? What became its shortfall? Why they struggled so much, and what got them arrested. Right there is a fascinating research, which for me would be an inside out because I was raised in this ecology. My father was a central figure in the movement, at least in the kibbutz I was born and raised in. So that deserves a whole exploration when we ask in the broader picture, what can we learn about human dynamics? So it's there as a proposal. Then I said, okay, let's look at popular culture. What about the Beatles? What about the Rolling Stones? What about more recent popular bands and their fans? There is just a tremendous energy and enthusiasm that gets unleashed in that, what can we learn and discover through these phenomena? And then, adjacent, what can we learn about dance companies, about orchestras? My mother was central in Israel in the classical music world, and earlier in life I was interested in dance as well, so I followed some of that, and I explored the nature of what we've seen about that in movies. So there is a particular unique collective pathology and possibility that arises when people play together and when people dance together. The horrendous jealousy and other pathologies that appear below the line, and what can be unlocked and unleashed when they truly surrender to the creative act that they are part of. I'm fascinated by this polarity, the below the line, the above the line. So that would do a fascinating research, but I don't know that we are right here, the three of us, playing an instrument and or dancing in a dance company. However, it's a fascinating space to go into. Okay, so now it led me into political parties, both on the right and on the left, and also to the US Congress, the British Parliament, the Israeli Knesset, and parliaments in other places. These would be fascinating explorations that we will need to enter in terms of becoming diagnostic about how power is managed and is distributed or not, and or manipulated and or not, and how are these systems, these are very critical systems, especially in the modern liberal democracies and the operating system that enable those to operate. And at some point, I imagine us being reflective on that, very much in the sense of what about this? So you know this moment in Apollo 13 when they realize that they're in a crisis, and the chief of the in the control says, "Now, can you report to me? Can you look at our problem from a standpoint of what's working here? Because now there is a mission change. It's no longer about getting to the moon. It's about how can we bring them to Earth? Can we look at what's working here?" It's very easy to complain about all that's broken in the US Congress and the British Parliament and the Israeli Knesset and so on. I would say we would need an Apollo moment there and say, well, so much is broken. Can we find what's actually right here? What are some of the perennial principles that we need to actually harvest if there is a new operating system that is to be unlocked through the crisis that we are now seeing in liberal democracies? To me, that's a fascinating research. And where we are exploring the deeper esoteric dimensions of our evolving together, for me, there is a direct line from that to the corridors of power of how large nations and large systems, how do they manage themselves. So I'm fascinating that at some point we visit this research. And then I said, please, absolutely, please.
On that one.
Please.
This, I think, brings in the difference between revolution and evolution. Because if you're actually trying to harvest the best and go from the best into what that could build and become, then you're in an evolutionary state of affairs. Revolution tends to be firstly destructive and then repetitive. So often it doesn't go anywhere. Yep.
Well, which is another way of describing the reversal that Nigel was describing earlier in the two dimensions, two levels of mixing color and the two ways of metabolizing air and energy. If we now paused and went deeper into this, my inquiry would be, can we explore deeper what are the mindsets that inspired revolutions, and what would need to be reverse engineered in some of those attempts to facilitate an evolutionary process. And I would even be saying, is there a point where you need a bit of the revolution and a bit of the evolution, and for this process to even there integrate? Can we park this as something we would come back to on a unique exploration as part of another evolving together, the relationship between revolution and evolution with some historic data points? And again, not looking at it purely as outside of ourselves, but using ourselves as part of the research. At what moments in our lives did we experience a response that was revolutionary, and how were we able or not to metabolize it, harvest it, and harness it inside an evolutionary inquiry? That's a good area to explore. So let's come back to that on another one. Just building here, and please stop me with anything that I'm bringing here that when it sparks something for you, as you just did well. I then said, well, let's bring a bit of the soccer and basketball teams in the Olympics, because as in the case of the arts, there is just unbelievable energy that's unlocked in humanity about those sporting arenas. Similarly, Hollywood and Wall Street. And Hollywood and Wall Street, a bit like politics, is an area we would want to come back to when we investigate more power, how power and the combination of evolving together plays out, the pathologies of power usage and distribution, and what might be the remedies. That will have to be a very important dimension in the exploration of building a new safe operating system that works for all lives and is part of harvesting and harnessing and facilitating possibilities for all. So then I said, okay, let's go to the large spaces, the Facebook, the YouTube, the Twitter, now X. What are we learning about the pathologies and also what's working right? Because we also have younger people that we care for, sometimes children or grandchildren. They're influenced by those social media platforms. What is it that we can comment to that will be revelatory for us about the inquiry spaces for mutualized and collective human dynamics and the preventions and possibilities? And that led me to integrate also the food scene, the Michelin restaurants right next to the arts and next to sports. And I am also very fascinated by the dynamics of the academic world and what plays as currency there, and how honors became the currency of honor. And first of all, who is getting tenured and who is quoted when and where, and how the academic world, I'm going to use a word here, became unto its own universe, very cultish and self-referential. And similar thing you could say about the law, and how the law became so self-referential. I mean, part of what I often, every time I need to go through a legal document, I say to myself, right, that's part of the pathology and the business model of the practice of the law. They've created language that nobody can understand, so we are completely dependent on them. In the ancient world, you could just have an agreement, shake hands, and move on with life. Now you need to have all those clauses, none of which I understand, and I have to defer to a lawyer. So all of that, the world of fashion, your favorite reality TV, they all represent a window into this fascination of what is it that happens when we humans, when we come together, and the impulse, the driving, compelling inquiry for us is about how do we evolve together. And I insist time and again that to become even more revelatory in the evolving side. We need to look at all these spaces and say, what's broken? Why is it not? What is working, but also what is not working? And what can we learn from that? Because there is a way in which I sense that our shared consciousness is meant to serve now as a crucible of harvesting all the experimentation of the epochal journey, and especially the last, well, you could say the last 4 to 6 centuries, all the way from the Renaissance and the Enlightenment project that unleashed the modernity project, the industrial society. So much of that miracle has been captured. And we have a responsibility to be diagnostic and where we can prescriptive in the updating, as you're proposing, well, not take the Maoist approach. The Maoist approach was more the revolutionary approach. We're going to destroy everything, burn it to the ground, and then build something new. You're saying the universe loves economy. It wants to harvest from every experience. Don't destroy everything the universe created up to now to recreate life all the way from the ground up. What a waste! What a waste! Is there a way for us to harvest from the experience? So I have this very strong sense, which is why I'm passionate about it, that part of what we're supposed to be metabolizing in this liminal transition we are in, where so much is breaking down, and we seem to be experiencing a regressive process in the evolutionary journey, that the regressive cycle has a purpose. And part of the purpose is exactly what we are mapping here, which is to become diagnostic and dialectic. Because anything we will describe outside in one way or another, we can describe inside. Sometime we are hurtful and so on and so forth. Whatever we are able to describe outside in some way is emergent in our own process. How can we do the work on the inside such that we then proffer that as what we call world work? So all those opportunities, I work a lot with business, so I work both with startups and with large publicly traded companies, some of the most successful companies. And so I have researched that space, and I'm fascinated with what works there and why it has been so successful, and also what is broken there and what can we learn and harvest from that. I'm fascinated by social movements, by the proletarian revolution. We just talked about revolution, with other revolutions, with the activist movements, with the Extinction Rebellion movement, with the Occupy movement. Those movements, they represent some powerful impulse of renewal, desire for renewal. We're interested in that. Why is it working? Where it's working? Why is it not working in some places? What can we learn through these? So all those dimensions of what's working through the social movements and activist movement are relevant. And I'm also very, very interested in what can we learn from Hasidic courts and from Zen schools. I'm particularly interested by the pathology of the narcissism of small differences. That is also what crippled at some point the kibbutz movement. That is a phenomena described earlier in the 20th century, which Zen schools exhibit and Hasidic courts exhibit. The simplest way to describe it is, why is it that sometimes groups that are closest to each other, like 99.999999, they believe in the same things, those Zen schools, they have some almost impossible to define and distinguish by an outsider difference in their theologies or their practices. But they take the smallest difference and magnify it to be the most important thing to build an identity about the differentiation between those two streams, those two Hasidic courts, those two or more Zen schools, those 2 or more kibbutz movements, so much that it unleashed hatred. Can you believe that? Hatred, ridicule, truly hurting each other. What is it about this phenomenon? What can we learn about the human condition through that? What will we need to metabolize about that if we are to create something new going forward that carries the antibodies that will not fall into schism? Every time in the history of mankind there was something that attempted to present a new arising, every time, every revolution, every evolution, it begins and then it suffers schism and it breaks down.
Yeah.
And what are the patterns that show up in that, and how do they also show up in intentional and developmental and communal endeavors? And what can we learn from all of these, such that whatever it is we seek to facilitate in evolving together, and circles like evolving together anywhere else, how can we bring all that knowledge online such that it's available for us, such that we are wiser in whatever it is that we are approaching? So I said a lot here, but please, what, if any, would you like to comment on?
Well, on the aspect of small differences, it seems like the nature of the world that we've created, it's like there's an allergy to difference. It's almost as though there's a fear of difference. But difference is our greatest asset, really. It's like you were saying about how we separate out. And it's almost like the power for us to integrate comes from the fact of our difference. It's like, the voltage of something is the potential difference that drives it. So it's just a notation that there's something in the system at the moment that is scared of difference, it seems.
And you are describing that it's a third, I think if I understood you correctly, about the technology of holograms, and you know about this more than I do, you need did you mean that you need a third source of or a second, even just a second source of light that beams into, and that creates the hologramic three-dimensional?
The fact of the two allows the third.
Right, the refraction of the two allows the third, so we actually need that difference, or else we
right.
Yeah.
And on something completely different to do with the Olympics and sport. Now, there's something in me that's been allergic to sport, or rather to the portrayal of competition at its lowest level. Because I believe competition is a high thing in the way of competition, that together we can make a petition that's way stronger than we can make on our own. And if you can acknowledge that level, it's a sharing of passion at that level. Like you see when 2 top tennis stars come together. You know that they love the same thing, and they contract to the opponent to stretch themselves in that same thing. So it is a high integrating thing, but the world portrays it at its bottom line of it's just about crushing another.
Well, this is a curious comment, because we paused on the ancient Olympiads and again on the Olympic spirit when we did, in a different context, the trace of the epoch. And we associated that with the green impulse, the green fractal rather of the epoch. And when we trace the deep roots of the Olympic spirit, it has that suggestion. There is a gesturing. There has always been a gesturing, especially if you go to some of the earlier Olympics, before it became indeed highly commercialized and industrialized, and before you could make individual contracts for many millions of dollars, and which has its, in some way, benefits in what it permits in some ways to build expertise and to build know-how, but you're right, creates a dynamic of winners takes all, which in some way becomes an arresting, a preventing possibility from the Olympic spirit. And the Olympic spirit was being in a shared human cause to excel, in this case, in our athletic abilities to the edge and beyond. So this is exactly what we're actually seeking here, to discover that in each of those, I mean, if we went for a minute to the US Congress, the British Parliament, the Israeli Knesset, people who go into public service, you'd say, right, similar to what we're describing in the Olympics, where there is above the line permission for people to unify in a higher cause to celebrate human ability. In a similar way, there is something absolutely noble about public service, and many people who felt a calling to serve the public good, and yet how the system was captured by something else. And we want to actually run that diagnostic distinction. What is it that is pulling us below the line to be guided by our lesser angels, and what are the natures and motivations and persuasions that draw us above the line to be guided by our higher angels, and what design features can be brought to bear to facilitate more of the higher case. So the beauty in the comment you just made, Nigel, about the Olympics is each box here we can look at, we will discover it has an above the line, exciting, inspirational potential, and below the line, pathological or captured expression.
Yeah. And just one more thing, you mentioned the law, and how I find it fascinating that in England, because there is such a history of law in England, they claim that this is the most civilized place, when actually the need for external law says that this is the most degenerate place, because people didn't have their own internal law. It's just fascinating how it's portrayed.
Well, this will become a fascinating exploration when we muse about the future, because if the future is not an extrapolation of the past, and is not, as you describe, in asexual reproduction, which simply can copy and produce more of the same, then we will not be captured by all the precedents of the past. I mean, part of the core premise of the legal system is it is precedent-based system. And the implicit premise in that is we cannot think for ourselves anew today and come up with any higher view. So we have to be guided by historic precedents. So it's almost as though we are relinquishing, before we even begin the exploration, any possibility to access and source new higher intelligence. At the same time, do I have at the moment a better solution? Am I proposing to do away with the legal system? No, I'm not. So smarter people than us perhaps need to explore this. I think we have a part to play in bringing this awareness of the above the line, below the line, above the line inquiry in the context of this evolutionary mindset, that you offered. And anything you'd propose or comment about this, those spaces we reflected on here?
What captures me about it, Aviv, is the sheer eclectic vastness of it. And the fact that, rather than looking at one thing, we're looking at multiple spaces and multiple realms, none of which were necessarily captured by and drawn into of themselves. So the very fact that you look at the multiple of it gives you a chance of escaping beyond what prevents, into a greater possibility where these things cross-fertilize into their higher potential. Yeah, and you also get to see the traps in a multifaceted way, So I think there's a great strength in the multiple weave that you present. Yeah, moving of it.
And in the way we told the story, certainly of the 4 days journey we've been on, there was a suggestion that, as was the case in the individual human being, where there is a soul, the journey of the soul, in that it is by design oriented to express its highest nature in the unique configuration that we each are, but once experiencing a separation, it tends to produce a psychology which we describe in a compensatory act that we call the ghost expression. That in a similar way, not exactly the same, but in a similar way happens when people come together. That when we come together, this space we create, the field we create, develops some kind of a quality of a soul-like nature, in that it guides us in terms of permissions and possibilities, or preventions and arrestations. And that when we will focus on to any of those spaces we explored and reflect on the below the line and above the line, and what we sometimes describe as the agragoric occult nature, what we describe there is the collective memory system we produce that prevents us from accessing the more or liberate us to accessing the more. So I suppose I'm going full circle back to the roots of what we embarked here in the idea of evolving together, and with that invite your any other comments you want to make before we close today, which is, how about if we consider that evolving together is a process where we create new memory systems? Because every time we unlock new possibility, every time we embrace a new configuration, or as you suggested, well, the universe at large is discovering itself anew through the combination that we facilitate, when we metabolize a moment like this, we create a new memory in ourselves, a new memory in the universe. So the invitation of evolving together is a way of, earlier we said, turning the light on, spiritualizing the universe, and right there with it as another dimension. And when we do so, establishing new memory system, new layers of memory in the mutualized space. The suggestion being that then others can travel that trace themselves and take it beyond, and take it further beyond, hence pushing the envelope of possibilities, if we like, pushing the void to embrace more of what becomes available for us. So I'd offer that as circling back to the initial impulse, please.
What that brings to mind in me is the extraordinary possibility of the human as a space-making capability at multiple levels in multiple ways. Because we're able to create space. Not just in the idea of physical space, but for example, mental space, perceptive space, feeling space, deepening space, evolutionary space. We're a model that can do this. We're space making. And when this goes wrong and goes the opposite way, I'll give you a little salutary example. There's a house in Derbyshire where people used to live, one of these stately homes. And as their life together gradually became more fixed, they closed off and locked rooms in the house. Just left them as they were and lived in what remained of the house. And this is often what can happen when you go in the opposite direction from space making to confining each other in what remains of the possibility because of what you haven't been able to escape and move beyond. So these dynamics are salutary in all sorts of ways.
Yes, and yes, and yes. Thank you for sharing this story and metaphor. I was not aware of that. And curiously, when we started to map the 1,000 faces of Homo Universalis, the first face is space makers. And so we've been on an adjacent exploration to this series in the Universalis inquiry about that question of space making. What you're describing is the large mansion where every once in a while or every generation shut down. It created for me a very clear imagery of, in the end, they're all living in one little chamber, and the 99% of the larger mansion is locked.
Yeah.
Could it be that we are actually looking to do the reverse journey, that so far all that we have accessed is the 1% or the 5% of what's possible for the human in the universe, and that the rest of time, universally speaking, is for the human to expand to the 6%, to the 7%, to the 8%, to get to the 10%. And once we get to the 10%, whatever chain reactive unlocking process that will unlock. So that's a very potent psycho-activating imagery to imagine a house that is closed down, to very little part of it remaining accessible.
Yeah. And from my experience of working as a handyman, most people's houses are stuffed to the roof with their history.
You said your experience working as?
A handyman.
Handyman. Right. Yeah. Well, any other closing thoughts for today's exploration about where you want to live this with as we look forward to regather in the future?
Yeah, just one thing I'd latch onto was I love it when words present themselves and they have two distinct meanings. And the word that's turned up is terminal. And we're each almost like a terminal for what created us. But one meaning of terminal has an ending. So unto ourselves, we're each terminal. But maybe in our mutuality, we're a terminal for a new life appearing.
Especially when we evolve together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, anything from you before we close it here?
I think I would just emphasize the depth and richness of what is becoming possible. Yeah, and how that in itself adds another dimension. Yeah, beyond simply the expansion of the space, but also the sense of it becomes a a deeper and richer and more potent space that allows something else.
Indeed. Well, thank you for that. And if you stayed with us all the way through to the end of this episode 5 of Evolving Together, please see it as an invitation to create your Evolving Together conversations wherever you are, with a circle of friends that you can create, very much like we are creating, where the core premise is we are better exploring these questions together, because we can liberate each other to what we cannot perhaps get to on our own. So thank you, Well. Thank you, Nigel. To be continued.
Yep. Thank you, Aviv.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.